Have you ever wondered about the weight of a memory? Not just the emotional burden, but a physical weight, something heavy enough to stir the dead from their slumber. In a time long past, a belief took hold that memory was heavier than bone. When a person died, they were carefully laid to rest, their bodies positioned to face the paths they once walked in life. The living did this out of a deep-seated fear and a profound respect, because they knew that sometimes the pull of memory was so strong, so relentless, that it could haul a body upright, straight out of the grave. They weren't monsters, not in the way we think of them now. They didn't rise with hunger for the living or malice in their hollow eyes. They were called the remembered, and they were driven by something far more complex, the fragmented echoes of their former lives. A powerful surge of love for a child left behind, a searing regret over words left unsaid, the phantom ache of unfinished days. These were the forces that animated them, pulling them back into a world that had already begun to move on without them. They were ghosts in their own skin, searching for homes that no longer knew their names and faces that had learned to smile again in their absence. Imagine the quiet stillness of a village at dusk, broken by the silent, shuffling figures of the remembered. They didn't seek to harm. Instead, they were prisoners of their own pasts, reenacting the routines that had once defined their existence. You might see an old fisherman standing by a dried-up riverbed, his hand casting an invisible line into the dust, his gaze fixed on a horizon only he could see. Or a midwife, her form barely visible in the moonlight, humming a soft lullaby to the shuttered windows of a house where no child had been born for a generation. A farmer might trace the furrows of a fallow field with a phantom plough, and a lover might stand for hours beneath a window, waiting for a face that would never appear. These nightly rituals were a hauntingly beautiful and sorrowful sight. The remembered were trapped in a loop, their actions guided by the deepest grooves of their souls. They were peaceful, almost serene in their single-minded purpose. They would never attack, never show aggression, unless something shattered their fragile hold on the past. If a memory turned sour, twisting from love into a desperate, gnawing despair, then their sorrow could curdle into a terrifying rage. A memory of betrayal or a sudden, violent end could transform them into something truly dangerous, their grief becoming a weapon against the world that had let them suffer. The living learned to coexist with these wandering souls. They developed rituals, not of fear, but of compassion. It was a delicate dance between the past and the present. Families would visit the graves of their loved ones, not just with flowers, but with objects meant to soothe the restless spirits. They would leave a carpenter's favorite hammer, worn smooth with use, or a baker's wooden spoon, still faintly smelling of flour and spice. These tokens were anchors, intended to help the dead finish their remembering, to find a sense of completion in the echoes of their life's work. It was a way of saying, "We see you. We honor what you were. Now, you can rest." But the most profound ritual was the night of welcome. Once a year, on a specific, sacred night, families would unbar their doors and light a candle in the window. They would prepare a meal, set an extra place at the table, and wait. If a remembered soul from their family was still walking the earth, it might be drawn to the warmth, to the familiar scent of home. It would enter, not as an intruder, but as a guest. The family would gather around, and in the quiet, reverent atmosphere, they would speak their stories aloud. They would recount the life of the departed, sharing tales of their triumphs, their follies, their love, and their laughter. They spoke not to the shell of a person before them, but to the memories trapped within. They would tell the remembered farmer how his fields were now tended by his son, how the harvest was good. They would tell the midwife how the baby she last delivered was now a healthy, boisterous child. They were filling in the blanks, finishing the stories that death had so cruelly interrupted. It was an act of communal healing, a way for the living to process their grief and for the dead, perhaps, to find a semblance of peace. When the stories were done, the remembered would turn and walk back into the night, their steps a little lighter, their burden eased, if only for a while. Over generations, a slow but profound change began to occur. The world started to grow quieter. The nightly processions of the remembered thinned, their numbers dwindling with each passing year. The living, through their rituals of compassion and storytelling, had taught the dead something vital. They had shown them that their lives had meaning, that their love was not forgotten, and that the world they left behind was in capable hands. The memories, once so heavy they could defy the grave, began to loosen their grip. They learned to let go. The dead began to understand that holding on wasn't the only way to be remembered. The living, in turn, came to a new understanding of their own. They realized that forgetting is not an act of cruelty. It isn't a betrayal of those we have lost. It is the final gift we give to the departed, the permission to find their final rest. The weight of memory had been lifted, not by erasing it, but by honoring it, completing it, and finally, releasing it into the quiet embrace of eternity. And so, the world learned that true peace is found not in holding on, but in the gentle, necessary art of letting go. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the weight of memory. If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing for more tales that explore the deep and mysterious corners of our shared imagination. See you next time.